Hello and welcome to this video on the Prophet and the Warlock, where we'll take a close-up look at all the new units for the Skaven and the Lizardmen. So whether you're here to actually learn about the units and their role within the army, or just to perv on the sexy models, which is okay, this is a place free from judgment. Hopefully this video can help you get ready for the Prophet and the Warlock, so you understand the units a little better going into the DLC. So, let us begin. So let's dive straight in with Big Ikit Claw himself. He is a wizard primarily, but he has a lot of armor and melee defense, so he should have a bit of toughness to him, but he doesn't have a great deal of leadership, so you do have to be wary of that. He has fair attack power, which is armor piercing, anti-large, fiery and magicy. So he's quite versatile with all his different melee attack types, but his range damage is where he can really shine with his wrist mounted warp fire thrower, which also adds the burnt leadership debuff. And of course, he comes with the magic of the Lore of Ruin spellbook. He can also be put on a Doom Flayer or Doom Wheel mount, which will change the way he plays slightly, but is a nice touch as the Skaven don't really have any decent mobile Lord mounts until now. So many different roles that Ikit could play really, and unfortunately, no, he doesn't come with a Doom Rocket in custom battles or multiplayer. That is a campaign only deal, and this is why. And then we have the Warlock Master, who is very much just a budget version of Ikit, to be honest. He's a spellcaster, decent armor and melee defense, but low leadership again, okay weapon strength, armor piercing, anti-infantry this time, magical attacks, and the Lore of Ruin spellbook, not to mention the Doom Flayer or Doom Wheel mounts again. However, he is a little bit different in that he can provide a buff to your ranged units, which can be pretty powerful if you've bought a ranged heavy army, which could be the best use for him, other than being just a cheaper version of Ikit, who can charge around as a fairly tough chariot with spellcasting essentially. Although on foot he doesn't have the ranged attack like Ikit does, which may be where Ikit shines a bit more. On to our first infantry, and it's the Clan Vulcan Tail Lashers. These are your usual clan rats with shields with slightly improved stats, but most notably of course, as you may have guessed, they do fire damage, which could be incredibly useful in many situations, most notably fighting regenerating units of course, or even wooden units, so potentially some really nice usage for these little fellas. Onto a more elite unit with Blight Scab's Plague Pack. These are Plague Monks Sensor Bearers with improved combat stats of course, and an ability that makes not only them immune to psychology, but nearby allies as well, which could be incredibly useful for the Skaven, especially if you're facing an army which has the Fear ability, Terror as well. The Plague Pack could counter that very well, helping those low leadership Skaven units, which is pretty much all of them, last that little bit longer as the battle wears on. And then the Council Guard. These are Storm Vermin with halberds who are basically the same, got a nice bit more melee defense as well as melee attack, and they are unbreakable, so they will not rout, they will fight to the bitter end, which could be very useful against those large units as they are of course anti-large. And they also have the Guardian ability, which will provide a physical resistance to nearby lords and heroes, making them potentially a damn good bodyguard unit. So on to one of the units that everyone has been waiting for, the Rattling Gun Weapons team. They are pretty horrible. They've got decent range with a whole ton of missile damage, which is armor piercing, as well as a debuff that will slow the enemy's movement speed down, allowing them or any other Skaven missile unit to absolutely blast the crap out of them. They're good at shredding just about anything, infantry, monsters, other missile units. They've got a fair amount of armor, so they can trade with other missile units a little bit, but no shield, so they are slightly at risk. Of course, pretty much no hope in melee, but one of their biggest problems can be their firing arc, as it is very low, so you do have to find a good angle to fire from, otherwise you're going to find the same problem that you might find with warp fire throwers. And then we've got the Teeth Breakers, who are the Regiment of Renown version of the Rattling Guns. They're all but the same except for a good amount more missile damage and concealment bombs, so if they want to get themselves out of trouble they could use that, or if they want to get into a sneaky position they could use that. And another fan favourite, the Warlock Jezzails. These are basically snipers. They've got a whole ton of range, armor piercing missile damage, and the Shield Breaker ability, which reduces missile parry chance, all the while having a silver shield of their own, so giving them a bit more survivability against other missile units. So going to be fantastic at taking out those high value targets. Can be very difficult to deal with, although again, just like the Rattling Gun team, their fire arc is pretty low, so you do have to watch where you're putting them and where you're firing them. And of course, they are pretty useless in melee. And then you have the Regiment of Renown version Natty Bubo's Sharpshooters, who are basically the same but a bit more missile damage. However, they have Stalk and Snipe, which means A, they will be invisible until a unit is very close to them, and they won't reveal themselves when shooting, so they can stay hidden while blasting away at their enemies. So potentially a very sneaky fun little unit that you can keep out the way, just whittling down the enemy until they figure it out. Even better for sniping down those high value targets. Onto this rolling bundle of joy, the Doomflayers. There are 3 per unit, they've got a lot of armor, good armor piercing anti-infantry weapon strength, good charge bonus. They are of course meant to be used like a chariot unit, just charging around, mowing units down, not stopping to stay and fight in melee for too long because they only have 21 melee defense and low leadership. At present they are very high in mass, so they honestly tear straight through pretty much any infantry unit. They'll go in and out the other side, no problem. Of course they'll require a fair bit of micro, but they can be absolutely disgusting. If you're specifically looking to mince some dwarfs though, you may want to bring the Dwarf Thing Menace, which is a trio of Doomflayers designed for mashing up dwarfs, or any other heavily armoured enemy for that matter, as it has armour sundering and also comes with fear. I should also mention that both these Doomflayer units have a passive ability that gives them extra armour when in melee. Personally though, I'd still recommend keeping them moving. The Menace is quite unique though in the fact that it combines mobility with armour sundering, meaning you can drop it all over the battlefield, maybe plough through the front line, support your front line with that armour sundering, then roll into some cavalry to help out your rat ogres that are fighting cavalry. There's all sorts of options that it could be useful for. We also now have the Wheels of Doom, which is the raw Doom Wheel, which has slight improvements to melee stats, but has a big improvement to missile damage. So really, it's going to be used just the same as the normal Doom Wheel, it's just going to be able to pump out a bit of extra missile damage, which isn't really something you control anyway. So just another chariot again, a more powerful one, fantastic for harassing backlines and infantry units. Just be sure to keep her moving most of the time. And lastly for the Skaven, Ikit's Zap Zap, a warp lightning cannon with more missile damage and a debuff that adds 10 seconds to enemy ability recharge times. Honestly, I'm not sure how much use this really is unless you keep it focused on one enemy for the entire battle. So, how are all these new units going to change the game up for the Skaven? Well, it's made them a much more viable ranged faction now. They had their strong artillery before, but their longer range missile infantry was definitely lacking. Now with Rattling Gunners and Jezzails, they move more into the territory of the Vampire Coast in terms of range power, allowing for some much more defensive builds and playstyles. The addition of Doomflayers as well gives us a great harassing unit in a chariot style. Of course we had Doom Wheels before, but Doomflayers just seem to be a little bit more mobile and capable of getting away from things. So much better flanking and harassing power for the Skaven now. Also having Lords that can be put on a Doomflayer or Doom Wheel gives some mobility to Skaven Lords, as they were really lacking that before. Definitely some nice additions for the Skaven, addressing some of their key weaknesses. Tahenowin, our first lizard of the day, a reasonable melee fighter who comes with the Lore of Beasts spellbook. He's got decent armor piercing weapon strength as well as frenzy, and some good defensive stats but nothing outstanding. So he's a nice addition to the Lizardmen Lords, as before they didn't really have any casters that could really stand up in melee, which makes Tahenowin the most expensive of the Lizardmen Lords. You could also put him on a Horned One, Ripperdactyl or Ancient Stegodon mount. Onto your first Skinky Lord with Tic-Tac-Toe. He is a skink mounted on a Pterodon, and you cannot take him off of it. He's on that mount and that's all he can do. So he's purely a flying lord, he's got decent armor piercing weapon damage, some good melee attack, and a pretty hefty charge bonus, but he does only have 30 armor, which can make him a little bit squishy, although he does have a physical resistance and a missile resistance to help him out. He does have a bombardment ability so he can drop the bombs, and he comes with Vanguard deployment, which is probably going to be one of his best uses, mixing him in with some Ripperdactyls that can also Vanguard deploy, allowing some aggressive aerial assaults at the start of the battle. Another skink that can take command of your forces, the Red-Crested Skink Chief. His stats are similar to Tic-Tac-Toe, so he's kind of the ground version of him. He's got a little bit more armor, similar combat stats, but he is anti-large as well, so he can help out in that department if need be, and he has the option of a Horned One, Ripperdactyl or Ancient Stegodon mount. He's pretty useful on his Horned One mount because he can travel with cavalry and he is anti-large, so he can help them out using his anti-large bonus. He's also the cheapest of the Lizardmen Lords, allowing more money for the rest of your army. Onto a hero in Big Papa Croaky, aka Lord Croak. He is a caster with his own 3 unique explosion spells, and while they do cost a fair amount of magic to perform, they can drop a lot of damage. In terms of melee, he's a bit of a weird one as he is unbreakable and has good weapon strength, but he only has 12 melee defense, so he's going to take a lot of damage in melee, but he does have an ability giving him 44% damage resistance for a time. So some powerful magic available from Lord Croak, but he may need support and protection in the melee. He's also pretty pricey. Onto our first infantry with the red-crested skinks. These are basically skink cohort but with great weapons, so they do armor piercing damage, still got the poison, a nice addition for some cheap armor piercing for the Lizardmen, as they pretty much had none other than Temple Guard in their infantry, so this should jazz up their front lines a bit so that we don't just see only frickin' Saurus warriors all the damn time. So definitely a nice addition for the Lizardmen. And then you've got the Regiment of Renown version, the cohort of Sotek. These little fellas are unbreakable first of all, and they also have a poppable buff, which means they won't lose any models while it's active, so they can't die. They'll still lose health, but they won't die. So very useful in the right moment. It can help you get out their extra damage because the units will still be alive where they would otherwise normally die. Onto some Saurus warriors with the Legion of Chakwa. These are Saurus warriors with spears who are basically the same as the regular ones, to be honest, just with improved combat stats of course. But they do have an ability that gives a missile resistance to not only them, but to nearby friendly units as well. So that is potentially very useful for helping protect your army. Could become an essential choice against those missile heavy factions. Star Chamber Guardians. These are just Temple Guard on steroids, although let's be honest, Temple Guard are probably already on performance enhancing drugs. But these boys have notable improvements to leadership and melee defense. They've also gained a charge defense against all rather than just large like they did before, and most notably they have the Guardian ability, so they'll provide a physical resistance to nearby lords and heroes. A great bodyguard unit potentially, although pricey. Onto a completely new addition to the roster, the Salamander Hunting Pack, a very powerful unit indeed. In melee they're kind of average, they've got decent weapon strength but they're lacking melee defense and leadership. But where they shine quite literally is with their ranged attack. They hurl fireballs at their enemies, which are not only armor piercing but are anti-large as well. So plenty of damage output for them, which of course causes fire damage and explosive damage, so they can knock units all over the place and disperse charging units, and they're pretty quick on their feet too, so they can reposition well or get themselves out of trouble, and they could work well supporting skink skirmishers as a ranged party. If you need some more brutal lizards though, the Umbral Tide may be a better pick for you. They're very much the same, just a little bit more powerful in the damage. They're a little bit better in melee with higher melee defense, but most notably they have Stalk and Perfect Vigor, so they could be very sneaky, very useful for some nice ambush attacks. Another nice addition to the Lizardmen roster. Onto some cavalry now with the Pok-Hobak cohort. These are improved Cold One Spear Riders who are immune to psychology, they have Vanguard deployment, and they are immune to going into Rampage, which is a really nice thing to not have to worry about with the Lizardmen Cavalry, as most of them do that. But Vanguard deployment is probably where this unit is really going to shine, can get some sneaky attacks on enemy cavalry and take them down swiftly. Onto another completely new unit, the Ripidactyl Riders. These are an aggressive melee flying cavalry. They've got a lot of armor-piercing anti-infantry weapon strength with a good charge bonus, decent melee attack, but they are lacking in the melee defense and the armor, so you do have to be careful. Maybe better off being charged in and out, but they can keep getting that charge bonus and avoid taking too much melee damage. They also have Fear, Frenzy, and Vanguard deployment, so again, lots of potential ambush plays to be made from some of these units. They should absolutely tear missile units to shred as long as they don't get shot too much by them, and any other infantry for that matter. And then the Regiment of Renown version, the Colossodon Hunters. These are Ripidactyls who are anti-large. They've got more melee defense, so they have a bit better survivability as well as some other stats, but they could be great for getting after cavalry and other monsters, dealing with enemy flying units, and they also have an ability that gives them even more damage output for a short time. So a nice anti-large addition to the Lizardmen army. And then we've got some Pterodon Riders with the Paho Sentinels, or however the hell you say it. These are your usual Pterodon Riders, but they have a physical resistance and the rocks they drop are armor sundering, so great for supporting troops at fighting those heavily armored enemies. A great combo with Ripidactyl Riders or Tic-Tac-Toe. Definitely a lot more use for this than usual Pterodon units with that armor sundering anyway. And on to the Ark of Sotek Bastillodon. This is your usual Bastillodon, but it can cause a vortex around itself which will poison nearby units. So pretty good at supporting the frontline troops using that poison to whittle down enemy stats, and still capable of charging around like a mad thing like Bastillodons do. Onto a Salamander that is of the ancient variety. In melee it's pretty good with a lot of armor piercing damage that also causes fire damage, but this is a hybrid large/artillery piece, so it has a strong ranged attack as well, which is armor piercing again, fiery again, and also gives a weakness to fire to those that it hits. So yet more artillery damage output for the Lizardmen. Could be especially useful against those factions that are weak to fire, of course, and also being combined with the Salamander hunting packs, which also do fire damage. They could support each other pretty well, especially with the debuff that the Ancient Salamander will give. And for one of the big boys, the Ancient Stegodon, Engine of the Gods. He most notably has a wind spell that causes absolutely horrific amounts of damage, albeit pretty slow moving damage. And he also provides a ward save to nearby units. So great if you want that chariot style monster with a ridiculously horrible spell, although of course do expect to be forking out your hard earned dollar for it. And lastly, another Ancient Stegodon, the Thunderous one. This big fella is your usual Ancient Stegodon, but he has a missile damage attack which is poison. It's pretty constant, so he keeps up the damage. It's not like a slow firing attack. You can see the pipe guns fitted on the front there, and it also causes random thunderous attacks all around it when it's fighting in melee. So just a massive damage dealer overall basically. Could be useful in many and any situation really, just gotta try and protect it and keep it safe from missiles and anti-large. Like all of the monsters. So what do these new units mean for the Lizardmen? Well, first off, you've got some nice new lords, so hopefully we'll stop seeing fucking Krokgar everywhere. And with some cheap armor piercing added as a potential frontline unit, that'll mix up the frontline game a little bit, as it pretty much is just exclusively Saurus warriors. And then you've got the Ripidactyls and Tic-Tac-Toe adding to the air superiority, potentially, of the Lizardmen. Not to mention all the flanking and vanguard opportunities that you'll have. A lot of people at the moment use skink skirmishers out by themselves, but they don't have a lot of ways to protect them. So Ripidactyls and even Salamanders can help protect those skink skirmishers and help them be more effective at their role. And then you've got the Salamanders themselves, who are very powerful, lots of damage they can do, and the artilleries as well, or the new kind of monster artilleries. Lots of damage to be done from all these new Lizardmen units. So there you go, all the new Skaven and Lizardmen units in the Prophet and Warlock DLC. Hopefully this helps you understand their roles within the army, but I'm sure there's plenty more creative ways that the community will come up with on how we can use these units. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future. Oh, you're one of the good guys that watches videos to the end. Have some unit prices if you wish.